Morgan. So this is my favorite interview that I've ever done. You want to just share a little bit maybe about yourself, or would you rather not, or?
Well, you know me.
Yeah, I know you, yeah.
My name is Morgan.
Yeah.
I'm 23 years old. I am married and I have two beautiful children, Bowen, who is 3, and Willow, who is 1.
Yeah.
My husband, Josiah. I'm a stay-at-home mom. I like to do art and design and photography and anything like that.
Yeah.
I love my children and keeping my home.
You're good at it. You're good at it. So thank you for taking the time away from your family. I know it's a huge responsibility that you have and your husband has to take care of your home. So we're talking today about a video that I texted you about that has now been taken down. And it was on a subject that is actually near and dear to my heart because I came into studying this topic before I even got married. And you know, your mom and I have raised you a certain way. So, and this is about modesty. So it was this Modest is Hottest video that a well-known singer, Matthew West, came out with, I don't know, maybe a week or two ago. It's been taken down now. The first thing I want to ask you, before we talk specifically about the video, I want to ask you, as a young woman, 23 years old, who believes in the Holy Scriptures, serves Yahweh, what is modesty to you?
Modesty to me is not just one thing. It's a lot of things. I think it's first and foremost a spirit, a modest spirit, a humble spirit. A lot of places in the Bible when it talks about modesty, it's talking about showing off your wealth and not being showy towards others. So I believe that modesty is a lack of a haughty spirit and a showing off of yourself. I think that it is also about the way that you dress, a respect, not that you can't respect yourself any way, but it is a respect for Yahweh, a respect for your spouse, a respect for yourself. And also so many laws that Yahweh gives us are sometimes you're not sure the reason, but they're to set yourself apart. And I think it's also a way that He gives to set us apart from other people.
Excellent. Yeah, that's great. What was your initial reaction to the video? And don't hold back. Just tell me what you thought when you first saw it. Were you by yourself?
Yes. The first time I saw it was in a TikTok of somebody reacting to it. And I didn't know it was a new song. I didn't know where the song was from, but I just heard a 30-second clip of it and thought, that's gross. That's pretty much what I thought. I thought, oh, that's gross, but I'm not surprised. And I kept scrolling.
So why did you think it was gross? What was the deal?
I just thought it was framed in a weird way. The phrase modest is hottest is not a new phrase. It's something I've been hearing since I was young teenager. And the phrase modest is hottest in itself doesn't make sense to me because the point of being modest isn't to look hot or sexually attractive. It's not modest isn't about being hot. I don't feel like that's the right phrase. And also just in itself, a dad singing about his young teenage daughters, how they're supposed to look hot, or this is what the boys like, or I understood that it was a joke. It sounded like a joke, but not a tasteful joke.
Yeah.
And something that even though it was a joke to him,
right.
And I can understand that. People joke around about stuff. Putting it out there are so many people who will use it as not a joke and who will gather things from that and play it as if it's scripture and not just joking around.
Sure. It's kind of like, people will say a racist joke and say, I was just kidding, it's just a joke. But yet it's very hurtful and harmful to people of color or whoever the joke is being addressed to, right? My initial reaction was something that has been a pet peeve of mine since I started wearing tunics back in 2004. You were a little girl. And it is that anytime a song or a message or a book or whatever comes out about modesty, it's
just the women.
Always directed to the women. And it's like the women are the only ones that have to be modest. Now, I grew up in a culture where a lot of times if a visiting pastor would come in and preach, his wife would be dressed what we would consider modest dress, but he would like have on tight pants or a tight shirt. 1 Timothy 2 was the only verse ever quoted about modesty, and then when I studied it, I found in Genesis 3 where Adam and Eve were both given modest clothing in Genesis 3, after they fell into sin. So I do not like people who, just dictate towards the women. I find in church culture a lot of times that a lot of messages hammer down on women, and some women that grew up in that type of church culture, they think it's normal. They don't realize that, hey, we're just being hammered and hammered and hammered, and the men are getting a free ride to do whatever they want to do or dress however they want to dress.
Well, I've noticed that the women, it's cover up, and any evangelical churches, the only thing they say to the men, for the women it's cover up, for the men it's don't dress gay. That's the only thing you hear about modesty. Keep your pants pulled up, keep your shirts tucked in, look like a man. Yeah. That's the extent most of the time I've heard for men on modesty.
Yeah. There's a line in the song, what the boys really love is a turtleneck and a sensible pair of slacks, and we laughed about that, but that phrase, what the boys really love, that bothered me. I felt like it was making the female out to be a sexual object. Like that was the reason that a woman was created, to be this sensual or sexual object.
It's assuming that when we get dressed, it's specifically for the male gaze, which isn't true. Some people do that, but in a general rule, when we're getting dressed, we're not thinking, like, how do we get men to look at us? Yeah. A lot of times it's the opposite. A lot of times women want to avoid the negative attention, and it's just drilled into us from a very young age that women are for men. Women are not taught about a lot of stuff, but it's women are for men, and even though, you're not supposed to do this, you're not supposed to do that, you're also taught that that's what you are worth to a man. Like, if you don't do this, if you don't have sex with a person that you're dating, they won't stay with you. If you don't have sex with your husband whenever he wants to, he can cheat on you, and it's really your fault because you're not doing what he wants. Women are placed as sexual objects for men and not just looked at as their own worthy being.
That reminds me of a phrase or a term that I've learned in the last few years. Now, I think I grew up in this and just didn't realize it. And I'll get into in a second how I've had to reform my understanding on some things. But me and you chatted a little bit about purity culture in text messages, and that kind of sounds like that's where you're getting at with your last comments, is purity culture. And I listened to an interview. A friend of mine, his wife, was interviewed about that. Tell me what that is. What's purity culture, so our viewers can grasp that? Purity
culture is a mindset in the evangelical Christian church. It's a mindset and a teaching of abstinence only until marriage. But it's not just in the biblical sense of the law. Like, it is biblical to wait till marriage to have sex. But it is a mindset of, this is the only thing we talk about. All we tell you is wait and nothing else. So not children, but young adults, younger people are not being taught anything. I have friends who didn't know what sex was until they were 18 and having a baby. Didn't know anything. It's being taught to the women, cover up. If a boy looks at you, he's going to have bad thoughts. That's your fault. You're causing him to have lustful thoughts. It's putting so much emphasis on that one thing over all others. I think because a lot of parents are scared of the things that could happen to your children, it's putting so much emphasis on that one thing, and it leads to teenagers having bad relationships with sex, porn addictions, because they go to look to the internet for things that they are not learning at home. It's lustful thoughts in men and women, because nobody's being taught. It's an emphasis too on the woman, because the men are not being taught that they're being taught, don't watch porn, don't have sex, but they're also being taught that if a woman's dressed that way, you're going to lust after them. Which isn't automatically true. Sure. And women are being taught, if you dress this way, men are going to have thoughts about you. If you go to a party and you're dressed bad and you get raped, you shouldn't have been dressed that way.
So it's always the girl's fault.
It is always the girl's fault. And we're taught, women are a lot of times taught that we are for our husband's pleasure. But I've heard it said many times to women, women are not supposed to enjoy sex. That's a man's thing. And you're taught not to do that before you get married, but you're also taught if you don't do it, then they're not going to stay with you. So it's a whole thing. And then when you get married, so women end up disappointed because there's no education, there's no respect, and there's not a two-way street of communication and respect for each other as individuals under Yahweh.
In Matthew chapter 5 in the Sermon on the Mount, I recently preached through Matthew chapter 5, and there was a section in there about if you look upon a woman or gaze upon a woman, the World English Bible says, to lust after in your heart, you've already committed adultery. And it looks like in Matthew 5 that Yeshua is always contrasting his understanding of Torah with the Pharisees' understanding of Torah. And I came across in my sermon pointing out that Yeshua was putting the blame on the person doing the lusting and not necessarily on the person that was being lusted at. Now, like you said, men or women could dress provocatively on purpose to try to get a woman to look after him or a man to look after her. But when I go out in the world, obviously there are people that live in the world that don't serve Yahweh or are not even Christian or religious. So I'm going to see people dressed in all different ways, when I knock on the door to do my next job. It's my responsibility as a follower of Yahweh, number one, and as a man of Yahweh, number two, to control my eyes and cast down thoughts that might come into my head, according to the words of Yeshua. It seems like in purity culture, or in a lot of evangelicism, if that's the right word, that's really not talked about. It's more, you're always the reason that the man is lusting. So, it's not that we're okaying. Like you said, you mentioned at the beginning, you believe in modesty, and I believe in modesty, but when a person is lusting after another individual, they could be dressed modestly, and they still get lusted after. Am I right in saying that?
It's framed that women are the ones who dress immodestly, and we need to dress modestly to keep men from lusting. And men, it's just framed that you are lustful. When really both men and women can dress immodestly, and both men and women have problems with lust. A lot of youth groups you go to, the boys are allowed to be shirtless at the swimming pool, but the women have to wear the super big t-shirt and shorts, and that's a double standard. And it also creates so much shame in men and women feeling shameful about their bodies, not because it's modest or immodest, just feeling shame in general, feeling like there's something wrong with their bodies, and men feeling like there's something wrong with them that they have to be lustful. And I've talked to women I've had friends that I've had friend relationships with who have told me how that when they got married, they still felt shameful about having a sexual relationship with their husband because their whole life they were drilled into that this is a bad thing. And how come it's purity, 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 and then somehow when you get married, you're not pure anymore. When purity is not solely based on virginity. Purity is a lifestyle. It's not something that goes away.
How'd you get so smart? When I was, this was early 2000s, so I was in my 20s, maybe your age, a little bit older. I was given an article, and the article was called, I don't know if I ever told you about this, the article was called The Sin of Bathsheba. And the entire article was about women not causing men to lust by the way that they're dressed, and it was placing the sin on Bathsheba. Now, I didn't understand it or call it purity culture, but I grew up in some of that, maybe not necessarily from the way my parents taught me, but just church, being around churchy people, growing up like that. So I understand now that article was whack, like it was totally wrong.
I don't know how you could read that story and then say the sin of Bathsheba.
Yeah, so I study the Bible for a living now, right? So I read in Samuel, the book of, I think it's 2 Samuel, where it talks about that whole episode with David and Bathsheba and Uriah and Prophet Nathan. And it's like when Yahweh sends the Prophet Nathan, he goes to David. He tells him the story about the sheep and the poor man and the rich man. And David says, that's a man of death. He needs to pay back fivefold or fourfold or something like that. I can't remember the text. But and then Nathan tells David, you're the man.
Yeah.
And you've caused a reproach on Yahweh by what you've done. And we know that David had a repentant heart, and Yahweh forgave him for his sin. But his child that Bathsheba was pregnant with, he died, and he lost his other sons as well, if you continue to read. So the Bible does say that he sinned. I don't see anywhere in there where it says Bathsheba was in the wrong. She probably was doing what was normal to do for a lady.
I've seen comments saying that Bathsheba knew what she was doing. She was on the roof for a reason. She knew that David was going to be watching her, and she was trying to seduce him. The Bible does not allude to that anywhere.
Eisegesis, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
He specifically was going out of his way to lust after a married woman that was not his wife.
Yeah. What do you think about people that say, I think this could be plausible, and I haven't looked into it, but that David raped Bathsheba? You think that's probably what took place?
I think that it is a comparable situation to a president. Think about Esther and the king. You can't even go before the king without an audience because he can kill you.
Right.
So I don't know if he specifically, we don't know if it was two-sided or if Bathsheba wanted to be with David or not. She probably did love her husband.
Sure.
But if somebody is brought to the king, you know in your mind there is so much he was using his position to take advantage of her, because if you go before an audience of the king, you know you have to do what the king says.
Yeah.
And you can disagree with that, but then you're worried about your own safety.
Sure.
And your own family, her husband, what he might have done to her or her family. So maybe it wasn't that case, but I could totally see it was definitely abuse of power.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Abuse of power. He was the highest authority in the land as the king of Israel, and whether or not people might say, well, she could have fought back, and I'm thinking, with the king, fight back with the king,
So many women get in situations where they would do that, and when somebody's holding a gun to their head just to save their life.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that they were a willing participant.
That's heavy, Morgan. You have 2 children. Now, they're not anywhere on this level that we're talking right now, and, thankfully, you won't have to worry about that for a while, because that's difficult as a parent. How should we, as parents, teach our children about modesty? So what is your plans? And I know this, I'm not going to hold you to anything. This might change as you progress in your service to Yahweh. But as your children, get 13, 14, 15, how are you going to teach them about this subject? What have you thought about that?
I think there's a culture today of not even just immodesty, but of children trying to be more mature than they are. Young girls and boys trying to look much older, and that is very dangerous in today's world with predators and people, the internet, social media. There's more and more pressure on children to be immodest and do certain things to keep up with other people, or messages, all things like that. And I know it isn't modesty per se, but I think one part of that is not letting my children be on a social media platform at a young age. Because you can even look at statistics, the suicide rates, especially in teen girls, are so high in the past 10 years since smartphones. And the pressure to look like everybody else. They do all those filters on Instagram where it changes the shape of your face.
Yeah.
And it's making people want all kinds of plastic surgery. You feel insecure. You see somebody that's life looks picture perfect because they're choosing to post just these things. And you want to look like them. You want to dress like them. So I think part of that is not completely sheltering your children off from the world, but not giving them that platform where they're going to compare themselves so much to somebody else.
Right.
And then just teaching them, we are children of Yahweh. We're to be set apart. we're doing this out of not of shame, not because your body is shameful or any part of your body is shameful, but because we're loving Yahweh and we're keeping parts of ourselves for Him and for our future spouse if we do happen to get married.
Sure, yeah. So that's another thing, and I know that's not really what our topic's about today, but it's like marriage is sometimes an idol in churches because people look down on younger people that may choose not to get married. And it's like, when are you going to get married? You know, especially if you're like 20 or 25. When are you going to get married, young man or young woman? You know, I'm praying that the Lord sends you somebody, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to get married. You're married. You know, you got married at a fairly young age. I got married at a real young age. You're my first child. But I find in Scripture that it looks like to me, if anything, that it can be a higher spiritual calling to remain single and be celibate.
Yes.
You see it that way as well?
Yes, I do. And, you know, there's people who... It makes a lot of people feel less than in the church because there are people who do not want to get married, and then there are people who maybe want to get married and never are able to find anybody. Yeah. And it makes them feel as if they're less than when the church only talks about perfectness in the form of marriage. Or you've heard the phrase season of singleness. That's taught to women so much. You're in a season of singleness and how to get through this season. And sometimes you never find anybody, and that's okay. That doesn't make you any less than. I feel like it's the same with women who may not be able to have children. Yeah. Like the church teaches, you're supposed to live this way, then you get married, and this is how you raise your children. And especially for women, like, this is your purpose. Your purpose is to be a housewife and a mother, and that's your purpose. And it's really, really damaging for the women who are not able to have children or cannot find somebody to marry them, and even for people who are born with homosexual tendencies who want to live a life of celibacy, and they do not want to get married because they cannot marry somebody that they're going to love in that way. It's harmful for them thinking that that is the only way that you're going to be accepted.
Yeah, it's deep. Matthew West took his video down. I don't know how many days it was up, and I've been wanting to do this video with you since his video came out, but it's just, we both have busy lives, right? We don't, we're doing this on our Sabbath day, so before our service. I was a little put back by his comment on social media. I did make a comment on his post and say, I believe that you used wisdom by removing the video, and I respect you for removing it, but I felt like the comment, he said something along the lines of, it was a joke. People didn't take it that way.
My family thought it was funny.
Family thought it was funny. I've taken your comments to heart. I don't want anything to get in the way of me spreading joy and doing work for the kingdom. It just kind of came across as though he didn't really feel like he had done anything wrong with making the video. Was that kind of the vibe you got?
Yeah, and when I listened to it, I knew it was a joke. I got that. Yeah. But other people will use it as not a joke. And just because I've noticed lately people have a thing that it's okay to be offensive. Like, you don't need to be offended by everything. It's okay, like, don't be sensitive. But in the Bible, we're taught to be kind-hearted and slow to speak and not to cause anger in people. We're not just supposed to say whatever we want and say, well, don't get offended by it. Yeah. And so many people, I feel like, were upset by the video because of the push on women to be modest. Not a push on men, but a push on women. Do this, do this, do this. Men don't need to look at you. You don't need to be causing them to look at you. And it's a pushback. It's almost as if the church has pushed so hard on one direction that it's caused the pendulum to swing in the opposite direction. And so when people are saying, well, why are people wanting to dress this way nowadays and act this way? It's because they've gotten so tired of hearing the one thing that they've said, this is so harmful to me that I'm going to swing completely in the opposite direction and have nothing to do with it, when really the truth is somewhere in the middle, but it pushes people away. Yeah. And I think that him making that video, even though it was lighthearted and fun to them, it had harmful messages in it that people have been hearing for so long, and they're tired of hearing. They don't want to hear it anymore.
Yeah. Great comments, Morgan. Something that I noticed when he took the video down on his social media post, he had a lot of Christians that were commenting on his initial post. And they were saying, don't cave in to woke culture, don't worry about getting canceled and all that kind of jazz or whatever. And for me, I mean, you know me, I don't care what woke culture or any culture believes. I'm just trying to go by the scriptures. So when I saw the video, it's not like I'm worried that we're not fitting in with the world. That's not what I try to do in my life. I'm not worried about fitting in with the world. Yeah. I got upset because I felt it was anti-scriptural. I felt it was going against principles and teachings found in Holy Scripture. I didn't think anything about, well, you don't need to post this video because of woke culture or whatever. You kind of see what I'm saying with that?
I do. It's anything that you say that could be woke culture. A lot of the Christianity today, there's like two camps. There's the super woke Christians, and then there's the super whatever conservative Christians, and you can't be anywhere in the middle because this side wants to say, oh, you're so legalistic, and this side wants to say, oh, you're so leftist, you're too woke, you're too sensitive. And I feel like you can be somewhere in the middle, and you don't have to subscribe to just this viewpoint or just this viewpoint. Yeshua got on to some of the strictest people constantly for how they were putting more onto the law than what the law was. They were taking the law and adding, well, here it is, but also let's take it 3 steps further, and you have to do this. And that's what purity culture has done. It has taken a good thing, and it's sugar-coated it in a bad way to be 3 steps further than what it's supposed to be. It was especially weird to me. It's coming from modest is hottest, sincerely your dad. I feel like there is a overwhelming amount of fathers who, as soon as your baby's born, they're buying t-shirts for their little girls or little boys saying heartbreaker or I'm not allowed to date ever, or the little boy saying ladies man, and putting sexual people talk about not sexualizing children, but then that is putting a sexual connotation onto your children already at such a young age, and fathers are loading their shotguns to sit on the porch, and it's sexualizing their young daughters, saying you can't wear this because I don't want boys to look at you like a sexual object. But in the back of their mind, that's viewing them as a sexual object. Instead, they should be teaching their daughters to practice modesty in a way of self-love and love to Yahweh, and teaching their sons to not view women as that object. When you view a woman, you're not viewing her for the way she dresses, you're viewing her as an individual in Yahweh, an individual in Christ, and somebody that has purpose outside of just what they're wearing.
Morgan, I've learned so much from you as my oldest daughter. You are my daughter in whom I'm well pleased.
And the same nose.
Yeah, and we have the same nose. And I mean that. I'm not just saying that. I mean that. I have learned, just like I think that you would say you've learned from me as your dad or as your pastor, one of your pastors. We have 3 here at the congregation, so one of your pastors. I've learned a lot from you, and I appreciate you teaching me and being patient with me to try to understand. I mean, we're not a huge amount apart. I had you when I was 17 years old. Me and your mom were 17. So we're not a huge amount apart, but
trial and error.
Yeah. So I've learned a lot. I mean, you mentioned the whole thing about social media at a young age, and your mom and I have talked, and we've said, if we had it to do over again, we would not have given our children social media at such a young age just because they wanted it, and we're actually waiting longer with your youngest brother, to do that because we're trying to correct what we felt was an error. But even though we're only 17 years apart, we're definitely a generation apart, and there's things that are going on with people your age now that I don't fully comprehend, not just the way y'all talk or the words you say, but I just don't fully comprehend. And I have to understand not to reject everything and say, well, I can't learn anything from my daughter because she's my daughter and she's younger than me. I have to humble myself and say, what can I learn? What do I not understand? I've told people before, and it kind of shocked people, I don't want my children to grow up and just believe everything I believe.
Right.
If it's right, what I believe, then obviously I want you to believe it, but not because I believe it, because it's right. But if you grow up and, let's say I'm gone or I pass away or whatever, and you say, I love my dad and he was a good man, but I think he probably had this one wrong or that one wrong, and we need to make a correction and reform, all glory to Yahweh, because we follow truth, not dads or not moms or individuals, right? So, but I've learned a lot from you, Morgan. As we close, what word, if you had to give a word to young girls your age, or let's say, late teens, early 20s, thinking about getting married, engaged, early marriage, what do you say to them?
Young girls who are getting ready for marriage,
Mm-hmm.
focus more, read your Bible. Don't just go to it's so easy in the world now to read what other people are saying and choose a camp, but actually read your Bible and see what the Bible is saying, what Yahweh is saying, and not just feeling like you have to side with this camp or that camp on one side or the other. And focus on your heart. Everything on the outside does not matter as much. Beauty goes away. Focus on your heart and focus on finding somebody that sees through your heart and not just what you look like. Obviously, people are going to be attracted to each other. That's not shameful. You don't have to feel shameful about being attracted to somebody. You don't have to feel shameful about your body. You don't have to feel shameful about anything. But that doesn't mean that you can't also save yourself for that. And focus on somebody that's going to look through you and love you for your heart and love you for your heart for Yahweh, and not just for what you look like, not for what you say. Find somebody who is going to serve Yahweh with you and Him foremost, so that He can put you first above all of those other things. If you're looking for somebody and they just want to talk about your appearance, or they just want to talk, or if they're talking negatively about other people's appearances, you want to find somebody who doesn't look just at the outside. You want to find somebody who looks deeper than that. And if you don't find anybody, that's okay too. If your purpose is not to get married, that is just as whole and fulfilling as marriage is. There's nothing wrong with being single. That doesn't mean that you're less than. That doesn't mean that Yahweh doesn't love you. That doesn't mean that you don't have your place in the church. You're just on a different path.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Morgan. I love you, sweetheart.
Love you too.
You're a good girl.